Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be looking at the year-to-date return on investment, or ROI. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Now, I know the title of the video is Bitcoin. We're actually going to take a look at other ones as well. So we're going to look at Ethereum, and we'll look at Cardano, and maybe a few others. So do stay tuned for that. I do want to talk about, in general, with these cycles, one of the things that often happens is we tend to think that this time is different. And while we have to admit to ourselves that markets are always changing and, can do things that we often don't expect, it is a good idea sometimes to remind ourselves, well, has it at all done anything different than it normally has during the pre-halving year? And I like to go back to that to remind myself, is it different or is it more or less the same? Okay? When you live through something, it always feels different. But then when you sort of look back on it, it might not really have been that different. So this is the Bitcoin year-to-date ROI for all the different years. And one of the things I've said before is why not isolate, bear market years, pre-halving years, halving years, and post-halving years. What's interesting, when you look at, say, 2014, 2018, and 2022, they all look more or less the same. And this is one of the charts, which is why back in the summer of 2022, a lot of people said that Bitcoin had bottomed out at 17 and a half, right? That was a very popular theory back then, that Bitcoin's low had already occurred and that 17 and a half was the bottom. And we said, well, that would be, if you say that, you're making the same mistake that people would have made in 2018. And I was one of those people in 2018 thinking that 6K was the bottom. And then what we saw happen, we saw the bottom fall out at the end of the year. And that's again what happened in 2022. So again, against what people were saying, right? A lot of people were calling June the bottom. And we ended up getting a lower low eventually. Now then the question is well, is that the low or not? I mean, history shows us that we've seen in the last two cycles, we saw a higher low. One came, 14 months after the December 2018 low. The cycle before that, we saw a double bottom in August of the pre-halving year. So we have two examples. It was a higher low and a double bottom, and we'll see what we get this time, right? We'll see what we get. We don't know yet. It's impossible to know what it ends up being, but at some point we still have to resolve this inverted yield curve, right? And again, normally when you go into an inverted yield curve, the market is still, equities are still climbing the wall of worry. It's only upon typically the uninversion, but during periods of high inflation, you could see economic downturns even during periods of an inverted yield curve. But you have 2014 and 2018 provided a pretty good roadmap of what was going to happen in 2022. And one of the things we did was, let's just average out 2014 and 2018, and if you take the average, you get this orange line. It's like, well, that pretty much told you where Bitcoin was going to end its year. So far, we can see that 2022 was not that different from the prior bear market years of 2014 and 2018, right? It really wasn't different at all. And, even though there is a narrative, right, that June was the bottom that was put out, it did not come to fruition. So then the question is well, what's going on in the pre-halving year, right? Is this time different or is it the same? Because again, in 2022, there was this argument that this time was different and that Bitcoin had bottomed out in June when in fact it hadn't. So then let's go to the pre-halving year of 2023. So what normally happens in pre-halving years? What normally happens? Well, I've said this before, right? We rally for half of the year and then we fade for half of the year. That's what typically happens. Does that happen this time? That's what I think will happen. Okay. Now, I also thought that we would go lower in Q4 of 2022, right? And we did, right? We went lower than 17 and a half. It's possible that if FTX hadn't happened, maybe I would have been wrong, right? There's always a chance that could have happened. I mean, if FTX hadn't blown up, then perhaps I would have been wrong about that thesis. So there's always a chance that the thesis that we come up with is wrong. So there's a chance that Bitcoin does not fade the second half of the pre-halving year. But history would show us that it has been the most likely outcome. If you look at 2019, you'll see that this is kind of where the topping process took place. If you look at 2015, you can see that this is the region where the topping process took place before we ended up getting a double bottom. And even if you look at 2011, you can see that, the June timeframe is where the topping process took place before we went back down. So in all three prior cases in the pre-halving year, it was around the summertime that Bitcoin rolled over. So in 2011, it occurred in, day 161 marked the high. That was in June, I believe. In 2019, it was day 177 in June, and then we more or less had a double top in July on day 179. And then in 2015, it occurred in July on day 193. And then so far this cycle, the high has come on day 194. And it remains to be seen if that will be the high or not. Now, in the same way that we took the average of 2014 and 2018 to give us a blueprint of 2022, and again, one of the reasons why we said that Bitcoin would likely go lower at the end of the year is because of that blueprint. Why don't we do the same thing for 2015 and 2019? And we've done a video on this many times, but I just want to, for completeness, show you where we are today, right? So let's grab the average of 2015 and 2019. And again, there are a lot of cries out there that this time is different, right? A lot of people saying, hey, this time is different, and Bitcoin won't fade the second half of the pre-halving year. They could be right, guys, they could be right. I mean, it's a market. All sorts of people have all sorts of opinions, and people are right at times, people are wrong at times. So we have to admit that. I mean, there's no sure thing in a market. There's no such thing as a sure thing. So if you think what has to happen, you should take maybe a closer look, right? I mean, we don't know what has to happen in these markets. Well, we can say there are probabilities that certain things play out, and maybe a higher probability of one outcome over another, but it doesn't actually have to happen. But again, in 2023, there's a lot of people saying, well, this time is different. If you look at the average of the last two pre-halving years, you can see that so far this time has not really been that different. In fact, we're more or less where we were. If you average out 2015 and 2019, we're more or less where we were. And you can see that while we did have another pop up here in sort of the August timeframe in 2019, it did end up being a lower high. What's interesting is in August of 2023 will be, I guess, when we hear something, or by that date, something from the SEC about this Bitcoin spot ETF, right? We don't know yet what's going to come out of that, but perhaps there could be some type of renewed interest there. But in the end, as you get further out into that September timeframe, October, November, December, in the pre-halving year, it tends to fade. Now, if Bitcoin were to come back down to these levels over here, then it would actually correspond to Bitcoin going back to approximately $23,000. So if it were to go back down here, of course, if it goes back down to where the yearly open was, it would correspond to a much lower price, closer to like around $16,000. In order for Bitcoin to go there, I think you need to get into a more material scare of a potential recession and not just an inverted yield curve. You would need to see the unemployment rate going higher, initial claims, right, continued claims. You would need to see all that going higher. And that is a potential outcome that we should, I think we should plan for. And if that happens, then yeah, you certainly could see Bitcoin going back down to the prior lows. Remember, in 2019, while 2019 ended the year pretty good, right? This is what 2019 looked like. This is not, it wasn't only up from there, right? If you go out and look at the year-to-date ROI in 2020, I mean, it started off okay, and then it dumped like 30 to 35% or so. If you look at Wix, maybe even 40% from the yearly open, and like 60 or 70% from this high early on in the halving year. So we have to remember that as well. And again, if you take the average of 2020 and 2016, so if we just average out 2016 and 2020 and plot that on there, what you'll see in those cases, so this is 2016 and 2020, is that you can often start the year off positive, but on average, we can see a sort of secondary scare at some point before the market ultimately trends higher. So I would say that there have been a lot of cries that this time is different for Bitcoin and that it's following a different path. So far, that remains to be seen. Right? I mean, so far, it's no different from what we've historically seen. In fact, what we've seen so far is a much more tempered version of 2019, and it's a more impressive version of 2015. But if you had to imagine, like, if this low that occurred in January 2015 had actually occurred the previous year, and we started the year off, say here, it would actually look very similar to what's going on today, right? Like you just have to shift this whole curve up, back up to 1. You can imagine that this is somewhat similar as to what's happening today. And you can see that ultimately it rolled over into a double bottom sometime in the third quarter of the pre-halving year before then taking back off. So I continue to think, until proven otherwise, that this time is not different. Now, again, going into this year, my expectation was that not that Bitcoin had to visit either side of this range, but my expectation was that the lowest Bitcoin would go this year would be 12,000, and the highest it would go this year would be 35,000. Now, 12,000 came from this here, 25% below the yearly open. 35,000 came from up here, 2.1x off the yearly open. Clearly, we have not visited either of those extremes yet, but it doesn't mean we won't. So I would say that until proven otherwise, we are still following the general blueprint of what Bitcoin has done in the pre-halving year. Okay, and we will wait to see if that changes. Now, what I find interesting is that even though this market feels very different, and even though the path has been very different than the last pre-halving year, look at Ethereum in 2023 and look at it in 2019. The path has been different, but as measured from the yearly open, the price or the ROI of ETH at this point in the pre-halving year 2019 is the same, right? 1.5, 1.6x off the yearly open. Now, Ethereum ended the year below its yearly open. And again, you can see that it did not roll over until about halfway through the year. Now, what's interesting with ETH this time is that it sort of moved up and then it's just gone sideways. So again, it's been a tempered version of 2019. But as you get further out into August, September, October, November, December, it still remains to be seen is it going to follow this path over here? Or will it deviate? So far, there has not been a deviation in what we've historically seen. Again, Cardano looks really similar as well, right? I mean, that the path is different, admittedly, but at this point in the last cycle, ADA was about 1.2 to 1.3x off its yearly open, which is exactly where it is today. And ultimately, it closed the year about 20% below its yearly open. And it's fascinating because you can go look at a lot of different coins that follow something similar. Look at Litecoin, in fact, and take a look here at 2015 and 2019, and then look at 2023. In 2023, it's where it was it's more or less where it was in 2015, not 2019. But in all these cases, this is around the time where it started to roll over. Now, what's more fascinating is that in both years of 2019 and 2015, Litecoin ended the year up about 1.3x off its yearly open, which is where it is right now. So perhaps Litecoin fades here and then goes back up at the end of the year to end the year at about 1.3x off its yearly open. It is interesting that, and again, maybe a way to visualize this would be to add the average of 2015 and 2019 for Litecoin and then remove just those individual years and then compare that to 2023. Again, it's been a relatively dull year. I mean, it hasn't seen the exact upside. The downside has also been somewhat tempered. So my general thinking is that so far, this has not been any different. And maybe we could look at total market cap. So total market cap in 2023 looks something like this. What's interesting is that it has not actually taken out its April high. So Bitcoin did take out the April high. Total market cap has not. It doesn't mean it won't, but it hasn't yet. And if you look at 2019, it was a more impressive version of this. If you look at 2015, it was a less impressive version of this. In all cases, I mean, you can see that there was a little bit of a renewed interest in total market cap around this time, but as you got closer to that September, August, September, or more so like, let's say mid to late August, September timeframe, you can see the markets rolled over. 2015, it was a double bottom, more or less. 2019, it was just lower highs. Here, we're kind of in the middle. So all in all, this remains a very typical pre-halving year. Even the average of 2015 and 2019 for total market puts you exactly where total market cap is today in terms of the year-to-date ROI. So I hear the calls for this time is different. I also heard the calls for this time is different back in the summer of 2022. There's so many people that were calling for alt season back then and calling for the dominance to break down to 30 to 20 or 30%. So many people saying that the lows were in for Bitcoin. And then look what happened come November. And then now we have the pre-halving year and I see all this stuff, the same stuff going up about new all-time highs this year and all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, wow, I've seen this story before, and I saw how it ended. I think it's probably going to end the same way, and we'll see. History shows us that Bitcoin normally does not, history shows us that it follows this path. By the way, I will say a lot of the calls for alt season that you see, and a lot of the calls for rapid acceleration, were coming from similar voices who would have said that June was the bottom last year. So you have to remember that no matter what, there's always going to be people out there that are going to say that this time is different, no matter what, right? Always. Sometimes they'll be right. Most of the time, they're probably going to be wrong. Just like they were wrong about last year and sort of the June lows. So I will say, from my own experience, in the pre-halving year, interest tends to fade halfway through the year. I think one of the reasons for that is because we're far enough. So you have your bear market year and everything's oversold, and then we just get sort of a bounce. But at this point in the pre-halving year, we're still far enough away from the halving for it to not really have a material impact on the price. I think you have to get closer to 3 to 6 months before the halving before it starts to get more hyped up. So I think that's one of the reasons the market fades, is because there's no major event to look forward to. Yes, we have the spot ETF, but that's also occurring in August. And again, we've seen some renewed interest in August, in July and August before, but in prior cases, it was a lower high. And we just ended up fading back to the downside as we got into the September and October timeframe. So I just want to remind people that oftentimes saying this time is different does not work out. Oftentimes. There are some times, I'm sure, where it is, right? I'm sure if you go back throughout the context of history, you'll find periods where it was different. And something that had historically happened deviated from what it normally did. But as an investor, why should I, at this point, assume that it's different? I don't have any reason to believe it's different yet. Just like I had no reason to believe that 17.5 was the bottom in 2022. And there were a lot of people calling for it back then, and it's hard because you want to join the bandwagon, right? If you believe in it long term, it's so you want to join the bandwagon and say, all right, well 17.5, that's it. It's 21K, now it's only up from here. But there's this thing in the back of your mind that tells you, well, I also thought that in 2018 and in 2014, and it wasn't the bottom. And then you get to the pre-halving year, and a lot of people are calling for new highs, and it's like, well, in 2019 and in 2015, it's not what happened, right? It's not what happened. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. I will continue to stick to this story until proven otherwise. I suppose if come September, if Bitcoin is just still, if it's pushing higher, then maybe there's some merit to the this time is different narrative, right? As strongly as I feel about it not being different, if come September, you're still seeing everything not fade, then yeah, I think there would be some merit to talk about it. But at this point, as far as I can see, it still looks like what we would normally expect in the pre-halving year. So we'll see if this continues to play out. Again, if you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. And again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.